Well, guys, the Iowa caucus is only 2 months away. That's right. February 3rd is when the first votes will be cast. That is 2 months from now. And then 1 week after that in New Hampshire, February 11th, is when they hold their primary. So we are getting really, really close. Now, one big question is, how predictive are these states? And who is leading in these states and who's likely to end up becoming ultimately the Democratic nominee for president in 2020? Well, there are some patterns that we can look at. So I want to show you guys this. I want to kind of walk you through this here. But this is an old article from NPR from back in 2016 when they were trying to predict who was going to ultimately end up being the nominee for both the Republican and the Democratic Party for that presidential election. And what they show here is that in every single instance, well, except one, 1992. There was a Bill Clinton in 1992 ended up with the nomination, but he did not win either New Hampshire nor Iowa. But one of the reasons they claim is because Harkin, he won Iowa because he was the senator from Iowa. So they said it was kind of like a throwaway primary and they couldn't really count it. But besides that one instance, every other instance for both parties since 1976, whoever won one of those two states ended up going on to be the primary, to be the candidate for that party. So whoever wins either, and it's usually two different people, sometimes it's the same person, but whoever ends up becoming the nominee has to have won either Iowa or New Hampshire. That's the way this works. So that's how predictive these states are. So if you look back here, let's start with the Republicans. So 1976, it starts off. Ford won both of those states. And in 1980, you can see Reagan went on to be the actual nominee and ultimately the president, but he did win New Hampshire. He did not win Iowa. George H.W. Bush won Iowa that year. 1984, Reagan was the incumbent. In 1988, George H.W. Bush won New Hampshire. Now, Dole won Iowa, but Bush won New Hampshire. He ended up going on to be the president. 1992, he was the incumbent. You go to 1996, Bob Dole ended up winning Iowa. He went on to be the nominee. He did not win the presidency that year because he went up against Clinton and Clinton ended up winning, but Bob Dole ended up being the nominee. He did win Iowa in 2000. He won Iowa. He did not win New Hampshire. McCain won New Hampshire, but Bush went on to be not only the nominee, but the president. In 2004, he was the incumbent. In 2008, here you could see that McCain won New Hampshire. Huckabee won Iowa, but McCain ended up going on to be the nominee. In 2012, Romney ends up winning New Hampshire. Santorum won Iowa, but Romney ended up becoming the nominee. Now, also to show you, because this only went up to, because this was early 2016, who won the Democratic primary in New Hampshire or Iowa. Now, Ted Cruz, he won the Republican caucus for Iowa that year. Of course, he did not end up becoming the nominee. Donald Trump did. But look at this. Donald Trump won New Hampshire. So it still held even through the 2016 election that whoever wins one of those two states ultimately goes on to be the nominee. Now, it's the same thing for the Democrats. Let's go through it here. You've got 1976 Carter, 1980 Carter. 1984, Mondale ended up winning Iowa, and he went on to be the nominee. 1988, it was Dukakis who went on to win New Hampshire, and he went on to be the nominee. Now, 1992 for the Democratic Party was the only time that this pattern doesn't work. And that is because, like I mentioned, Harkin was actually the senator from Iowa. So they claim there that the reason why, so they say it was kind of a throwaway primary, didn't really count because he was too well known in that state to really get a good gauge. And also Tsongas was from Massachusetts, and that was really close to New Hampshire. So anyway, they kind of say that 1992, that was like the one time this doesn't work, but there's reasons for it. Now, 1996, Clinton, of course, was the incumbent. In 2000, Al Gore won both of those states, went on to be the nominee. In 2004, Kerry won both of those states, went on to be the nominee. 2008, Obama won Iowa. Clinton, Hillary, she won New Hampshire, but Obama went on to be the nominee. And in 2012, Obama was the incumbent. Now, if you look at the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire caucus for the 2016 election, the pattern still holds. When you look at Iowa, Hillary Clinton, she won Iowa. But guess who won New Hampshire? Bernie Sanders. So, and then, of course, that election, even that was, rigged or contested. There's many things that you could say about the Democratic primary in 2016, but it would have held true whether or not Bernie Sanders would have gone on to be the nominee. Hillary Clinton ended up, of course, getting that, but Bernie Sanders did win in New Hampshire. So this goes on to say, okay, these two states clearly are very predictive. So whoever wins in 2 months, one of these two states, whoever the winners of these two states end up being, and I do think it's going to be two different winners. Obviously, Trump is the incumbent, so you don't have to think about the Republican side. But for the Democrats, it's going to come down to, I believe, Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. And that is going to matter a lot for these campaigns. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this. Currently, what is going on in the polls with Iowa? Now, Iowa, Pete Buttigieg is leading, and he's got a strong lead in Iowa. This is why I say Pete Buttigieg is still not out of the race. A lot of people say, oh, Pete Buttigieg, he's a goner because he doesn't have anybody, he doesn't have the black vote, he's slipping with this, that, and the other. And I just don't believe that that's true. I think that the establishment is throwing a lot of their weight behind Pete Buttigieg. The foreign policy establishment, the military-industrial complex, they love him. He's definitely spewing the narratives for the warmongering establishment, military-industrial complex. And he's different enough. Yes, he's another white male, but he's different enough being a gay white male. He's married. And I think that they, and he's young. He's really young. He's like, 37, 38 years old, 39, something like that. He's under 40. So I think that they're kind of like, oh, yeah, this guy, he's different enough. And he's saying all the right things and he's willing to take the big money. So I think they're still going to put their money behind Buttigieg. And I do think that the plan, I'm going to say it, I said it last time, I'm going to say it again. I think the plan ultimately is to pair Buttigieg with Stacey Abrams, and that will get him the black vote. I don't think they're that worried about it. So, and that they don't totally play fair when it comes to these elections. So, whether or not he has the support of the people or not, does it matter, guys? Does that matter? But he is leading here. You can see he's got 26% in the latest poll. The next one coming in would be Warren at 19% and Sanders at 18%. Also, Buttigieg in the previous poll for this is Iowa, right? Yeah, for the previous poll here, he came in at 25%. And the rest of the pack was at 15, 16%. So Buttigieg has got a strong lead in Iowa, and that's concerning. That is going to be the first caucus in 2 months. If he can hold that lead, he will win Iowa. And I just showed you what this predicts. Whoever wins Iowa or New Hampshire ends up ultimately becoming the nominee. Now, New Hampshire, who is leading in New Hampshire? Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is leading in New Hampshire. So here you've got the latest poll that just came out, Emerson. This was from Thanksgiving week. Sanders in the lead, 26%, followed by Buttigieg at 22%. In the week before that, you've got Sanders at 16%, followed by Elizabeth Warren at 14%. And really, Sanders has had a really strong, now it's kind of a mixed bag the further back you go with all of these polls, but the most recent polls, if these candidates can continue to hold where they're at right now for the next 2 months, you're going to see Buttigieg winning Iowa. You're going to see Bernie Sanders winning New Hampshire. And that means ultimately, if the pattern sticks, that one of these two ultimately ends up being the nominee. That is going to be really important as we get closer to the actual the actual vote, because if it has to go to a second vote, then the super delegates get to show up and they get to cast their votes when it comes down to they get to come in and swing their weight around and say, well, who cares what the little people want? What we want is Buttigieg. And so we're going to put all of our super delegate support behind Buttigieg. This is why it's important that, I just kind of wonder if Biden ends up ultimately dropping out as we get closer and closer to the convention. so that Buttigieg ends up absorbing all of his delegates. And in which case, if Sanders and Warren are still in the race together, they're going to end up splitting delegates, and that could be disaster. What's really got to happen, no matter what, is whoever wins these early states, the rest of the candidates, especially those who are progressive, have got to just throw their support and their delegates at either whoever the person is that's in the lead. Now, these polls, I don't really trust polls. So I think that they very well could be crap. And I don't think that they do justice to the candidates who fare much better online with online audiences. That would be Gabbard and Yang. So it very well could be that in Iowa and New Hampshire, we could see an upset where Gabbard or Yang ends up taking a massive lead in one of those states and ends up winning one of those states. That's not far-fetched. I know a lot of people think, oh, no, they don't have a chance. That's not true. They do. They have a lot of support. And, these polls, who are they asking exactly? Those are big questions a lot of us have. But in the online world with these states, those other candidates are actually doing really, really well. So it's still, I think, anyone's game. But I do think that as we get closer to the convention, there's got to be a strategy, a plan, because we can't allow it to go to that second vote. One of the concessions that the Democratic Party made to Bernie Sanders from the 2016 election was that they were no longer going to use superdelegates for the first round at the convention, as long as the convention isn't contested, which really a better phrase for it that's often used is brokered. It would be a brokered convention as it goes to the second round. If it goes to a brokered convention, if nobody runs away with 51% of the delegates, if nobody gets a strong, full majority, 51%, then they go to this brokered or contested primary, which means the superdelegates get to come out from their smoke-filled rooms and they get to cast their votes for the people for the person that they clearly favor, that the establishment favors, and that would be Pete Buttigieg in this case. So those are my predictions as we go forward. I think these early states are going to matter a lot. I do believe that Iowa and New Hampshire will spell out who ends up ultimately being the nominee. So it's going to be, I think, after those two primaries, like I said, whoever's the progressive that ends up in the lead, I think all the other candidates that are progressive need to throw their support around that candidate, because we can't lose this fight. This is war, guys. We can't, and it's not time for playing around with politics and thinking of careers. It's time to think about the American people. And it is absolutely important that we get a progressive to get the nomination, and then that we ensure that we pressure the establishment to not McGovern them, whoever gets that, which is essentially try to smear their own, which, they love to do. I mean, we see them do it all the time with Tulsi Gabbard, and we see them even do it with Andrew Yang with the media blackout and with Bernie Sanders with the media blackout. We see them smear their own. They're not above it. So we have to, once a progressive does get the nominee, we have to ensure that the establishment doesn't go down that road. We have to scream and shout about it. So those are my predictions. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts. You can also email me, kim@kimiverson.com. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell. I'm going to be talking about NATO tomorrow. Donald Trump is at the NATO meetings, and there's some real squabbles going on about whether or not Turkey should remain in NATO. Turkey's kind of in this battle, and we're going to talk about that, hash it out. Turkey absolutely needs to stay in NATO. It would spell disaster if Turkey were kicked out or left or felt like they finally were bullied out of it, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching.